is an artist who makes these rules, and we're looking at the whole artwork, the finished product, in quadrants in order to try to figure out what the governing rules might be. So let's look closely at this bottom left, our last quadrant. Okay. So it's a very sedate start, which I usually try to start things with a lot of energy, but I wanted to just warm us into this Saturday morning at 10 o'clock.
Elizabeth, I guess I came in late. Are you trying to ask us if there's a pattern?
What a good question. Let's go there. Okay, so I'm going to let Suzanne in, and I'm going to let Elizabeth in. Welcome, Suzanne and Elizabeth. Okay, here's the answer to your question. Thank you for asking such a good question. If you were to write a set of rules that you were going to hand off to somebody else, and it would look, the product of their following your rules would look like this, what rules would you write? Would you jot them into the chat box? What rules would you write in order for somebody else to create this artwork? Oh, Lisa, I love this. We've got, okay, Kathleen, you're amazing too. Thank you for getting us going. Okay, Kathleen has noticed there are 3 reds in the lines they're in. So that seems an important rule to write down. And if you want to share out loud, please, I love other people's voices way more than mine. Erica says, don't repeat any patterns. Maria says, alternate vertical columns. Cool colors are not next to each other horizontally. And so cool colors, if we're not art teachers, our cool colors are our blue, the colors that kiss blue. So purple and green and blue. Yellow can touch all black and blue and white. Okay, beautiful. So we're starting to think of the ways they interact with one another. Anything more? What other rules would you write in order to create this particular artwork?
It looks like there's a repetition horizontally also.
Tell me more about that.
So if you look at the patterns, there's 1, 2, 3 horizontal, 1. So it looks like you never have 2 identical horizontal lines.
Oh my gosh, you guys are looking so closely. Welcome, Erin. I'm glad you're here. Okay, beautiful. So we're having some ideas about things that can and cannot repeat. Kathleen is noting just numbers. We've got 7 by 9, which is great. Create a 3-color, repeat 3 times, create a unique color pattern for each line. Awesome. I love this. There's something about the gradation. So when we zoomed in, you might have noticed that there are all different kinds of lines in these boxes. So we've got color boxes, we've got different kinds of lines. Cynthia's noticing that it seems like the texture becomes more fragmented when you move from left to right, which is an interesting observation. Thank you, Cynthia. Red and black are often next to each other. Thank you, Tori. Anything more that we haven't noted? The white in the final row makes it sort of drop off. Yeah, right. Like it feels funny that in this work, these white boxes, the blank boxes or seemingly blank boxes, just it almost looks like gaps or voids, which is interesting. Now that we're noticing maybe there is a mix of solid blocks and textured blocks. This is great. So we have this idea that we've looked really closely and we've tried based on what we could see to figure out the rules. And so here's a query for you just to kind of open the conversation. I'm curious, what was it like for you when you were looking at all these little individual sections, trying to work out the rules by looking at the finished product? Like what are you doing in your head? Or alternatively, if you found you were having some kind of an emotional or logical response to that demand of mine to you, what was happening? Can you tell me more? And feel free just to unmute or share in the chat box. What was it like to try to work out the rules by looking. Okay, so we've got the idea first, we're looking for patterns.
Okay.
Jump in.
Okay, hello. My name is Maria. Can you hear me?
I
Yes?
can. Yeah.
Lovely, from Argentina.
Hey, welcome.
Listen, well, I have just joined, but I was like tempted into telling a story and thinking about traffic lights. I was not leaning towards the more perhaps logical way of thinking, or the left side of the brain.
Yeah.
So this is what happened to me. So I would have liked to characterize the little dots. Okay, this is what happened to me.
That's so beautiful. And it makes perfect sense, right? Like you're looking at something that seems to have some kind of order, and your brain is trying to figure out like, what is the organizing structure here? I'll tell a story about it. I love that. So that's really, really interesting. We have all kinds of ideas in the chat box. We've got an idea from Roan about reverse engineering. Kathleen is linking it to like trying to do a Sudoku. I always invert that. Lisa felt some anxiety. Would you be willing to unmute and share a little bit, Lisa? What about its anxiety producing?
Oh, the artwork isn't, just trying to figure it out is.
Yeah.
Like trying to figure out a pattern, because I'm used to looking at things that are more figurative, like the great masters and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So seeing something like this, which I do enjoy, I would be interested, like I'd be sitting in the museum looking at this thing and reading the blurb next to it posted on the wall, so I could know what to think about it.
I love
because
it.
it's hard for me to think of something so abstract,
Yeah. So, right. Like we have these little labels on the side, right? And those labels sometimes bring comfort because they're like, oh, this is what this is about. I love that. Anil, I see that you have your hand up. Would you like to share some thoughts?
I would, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
I just thought it was really interesting that Lisa mentioned that, because that was my first thought too, when as the question was posed, what are we looking for? I was like, oh my goodness, what am I looking for? So the first feeling was like, what are we looking for?
Yeah.
And then the reason I raised my hand is that something very interesting happened, because I'm not a very mathematical person. That was interesting at first glance to start thinking mathematically. Like that's the first thing I noticed. Like, oh, it's repeated, it's numbers and all of that sort of thing. So just an interesting thing for me this morning, how my brain went to a different place looking at a piece of art, we don't think of as mathematical. Anyhow, that's all. Thank you.
I'm so glad you shared that. That's really interesting, right? Because we know that there are comfortable tracks in our brains. Like we have these comfort zones, but now we have the idea perhaps that when we're confronted with something and it starts to produce anxiety, maybe we go outside of our comfort zone to kind of solve it. That's beautiful. Sarah, jump in, share an idea.
It feels like a Sudoku.
Yeah, you and Kathleen had that connection. That's awesome. Tell me more.
And also when you were showing them in like the fragments, so in the parts, I felt like a lot more stress trying to figure out what the rules were. But then when you went back to showing it as a whole, I could see a little bit more the pieces of the patterns, and it helped a lot more seeing it as a whole rather than in the small sections.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. So recognizing sometimes when we get so close to something, but we're being told we need to figure out something larger about it, it helps to be able to step back and forward. Thank you for sharing that. We've got some ideas in the chat box about feeling more connected when we're looking for something, feeling more connected to the artwork or the artist. Cynthia's noting the difference between looking for logic instead of emotion. We have an idea of discovering opposites, discovering busyness or lack of busyness in the lines. Rose is noting trial and error. Another idea about moving quickly or telling stories. So this is really interesting way that we're using all these different kind of ways of trying to make sense of something that looks kind of either alien or perhaps like at first glance kind of simple, but then the longer we look, it gets a little bit more complicated, which I really, really appreciate. A shout out to anybody who's watching or participating that's a theory of knowledge teacher or does anything with philosophy. This is an interesting way to get into discovering differences or similarities between deductive, inductive, and abductive reasoning. So 3 different ways of kind of making sense of the world or any sort of problem in it. Oh, I love this idea, this connection that's being made to Mondrian's The Broadway Boogie Woogie artwork, which I think this idea of, primary colors definitely, will always be connected to that, at least for me. Oh, Kathleen, I like that you feel bothered. Would you be willing to share a little bit more about that? What were you hoping for? Like, what do you feel is bothersome?
Well, it's not completely symmetrical.
Ah.
Can you say that? Because there's an extra line. It's 4 sets of boxes.
Yes.
On the top, it's 5. At the bottom, there's an extra line. Then 1, 2, 3. Yeah, the extra line. I thought it should go on, but it doesn't.
So what an interesting choice, right? Like if the whomever created this wanted it to feel very like settled, perhaps symmetry would have helped, this or this something that felt a little more complete, but here it feels kind of bothersome. So I love
the
this.
color scheme on the last line is not as bright. It's just the white and blue, and then it falls off. I don't know. There's something going on there.
I love that. And I hear in your voice this like, I want to figure this out. So you all came to talk about government and civics and art all together. And so I am using this way of getting into rules as a way to start to think about how any system in the entirety of our world that is man-made plays by some rules, right? Because the system has parts, the parts work together, and the ways that they work together produces something. So we're looking at this artwork that is rule bound. And here is the actual set of rules, right? So the title of this work, which you can now see appears at the top of the print, is Lines and Colors, Straight, Not Straight, and Broken Lines using all combinations of black, white, yellow, red, and blue for lines and intervals. So that's it. That was the set of information that dictated the creation of this artwork. So here's the first question. If we look at this rule, this set of text that you see at the top of the slide, what are the parts of it? So if you were going to sort these words into categories that would serve as like the parts of the rules, what categories might you use? And you can share either in the chat box or out loud. I welcome voices. Yeah, jump in, Anil.
Thank you. Having had this revealed to us now, I think what I noticed right away in the colors that they're all contrasting colors.
Aha.
So
Okay.
they pop, and that's might be the thing with the, softening it with the light color in between, but black and white, yellow, red, and blue, which are the primary colors, and then all broken up. So that's the first thing that jumped out at me. Thank you.
Awesome. I love that. So I'm putting into the chat box, the parts that you've noticed are contrasting colors, and the way that they interact with each other is they create this pop. That's beautiful. Thank you. Roan's noticing rules of what hues to use. So we're thinking about the colors and the hues as being parts. Straight, not straight, and then hopscotch. Okay, so oh my gosh. So we have this conversation happening in the chat about the lines. So if we were going to break this set of words, this rule set into parts, we have so far colors and lines. Some of them broken, some of them not broken, straight or not straight. And we've got the idea that maybe all the lines are straight or when they should be. And this is where zooming in was my intention, because some of the lines in those little squares are actually wiggly, which is like very hard to see unless you can get smooshed right up to the artwork. Colors, lines, and intervals. Tori, thank you. So we have 3 different parts: colors, lines, and intervals. Okay. Any other parts that were not noticed, haven't been noted yet? Beautiful. So we have MT is still cogitating on, kind of checking against the rule set, which I really like. So texture seems to have been created by these broken lines. I love this. And the texture, it's kind of softens the intensity of the color. Beautiful.
If you look at the very top line horizontally, and then the last line horizontally, it's almost like it went from intense to cool, from like getting your attention to intensely and then relaxing in the end.
So almost like a gradient has been created, like there's a gradient that moves from less intensity to more intensity in the center. I love this. Okay, so here's the query then. If we have these parts, right, in what ways do the colors interact with the lines? That's part of what we're talking about right now. So the broken lines, these little dots, seem to create some softness that the straight lines or the wiggly lines didn't seem to have. So that's one interaction. We've also noticed the colors, how they are juxtaposed or placed next to each other or not, creates a new interaction, which is popping or not popping. Anything more? This decrease, thank you, Cynthia. That's a really beautiful way to put it. It's a decrease in saturation. Are there any other interactions? So we've talked about lines and colors and textures. Any other interactions amongst those that you're noticing? There's no shape rule, Anil, right? So we have this idea that if there's no rule about it being arranged in a grid like this, perhaps the artist could have selected a circle instead. So there's actually, we're discovering a little bit of latitude in the rules. We could still be operating within the rules, but there's a little wiggle room. Tori's noticing there's these white border lines. Tori, can you tell me more about what interaction do you see happening with those white border lines?
Well, that kind of ties in with the shape rule, I guess, as well, or lack of rule. Sort of that white border is consistent throughout. It's the same width and distance. All the squares are the same size, so it's sort of no size difference.
Oh, so interesting. So we're noticing that because the printer has selected this grid arrangement, it creates a sense of order. It creates these squares. It creates a consistency that's actually not mandated by the rule. That's really, really interesting. Thank you. So I love that already we're starting to think about checking against the rules. MT, would you be willing to tell me a little bit more about your idea that you just put in the chat about race and color diversity?
Yes. So all the colors are in different numbers, in different positions. There doesn't seem to be a fixed pattern, except for the fact that I saw that the square ones, which are maybe the biggest number, I think, the most noticeable ones, which seem to be in a diagonal position, they are all occupying different places without any regular pattern. Just as people walk in the street, it seems to be, especially now I am at the coast of Vichakesel, and I see people walking in different directions and all wearing different colors. Here in Argentina, we don't have so much racial diversity, but I'm thinking about the States. Yes, I'm thinking about the States, and you do get a lot of this. Yes, so and they all seem to be happy. They seem to occupy.
There's a comfortable coexistence in this artwork, it seems. Thank you for that.
Yes, and even though it's static, because it's a picture, it suggests some degree of movement. Okay, because in this contrasting juxtaposition, there seems to be okay, I'm trying to find my place. I fit in.
I love that. So thank you for connecting this to people, right? So we're starting to think. I love even the connection you made to walking in the street. So even if we don't say it out loud, we look to each other about what are the rules of walking in this street, right? So we look to each other and we're like, oh, in Washington, D.C., where I live and work, there's this unspoken rule until recently, then they started to make announcements that on the escalator, when you're leaving the station, you should stand on the right and walk on the left. And you can see people, the first time they're on the metro escalator, they're standing all over the place. And then these grumpy DC people are standing behind them and like tap, 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 stand on the right. Nobody says it really, but it's this understood arrangement. So these rules, whether they're spoken or unspoken, govern the way that we interact.
Yes, it takes some time. It takes some time. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
And
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so happily we could spend more time looking at this artwork, but I want to keep moving because I want to make sure that we're really clear on what we're doing together today so that we can jump back into it. I love this. So as you can see, my learning targets, we're going to be practicing some looking skills with the intention of uncovering complexity. We're going to be using some thinking systems in order to in order to explore interrelatedness in civic life. And we're going to be using all of these artworks as kind of metaphors in order to synthesize our thinking as we go. We're going to be connecting to civics content and coming back to artwork, going to an artwork and then coming back to civics content. And in the end, I'm going to invite you to fully synthesize with a little bit of application. So that's where we're going. We're on the second bullet right now, and we're going to be moving through these hopefully at a fairly rapid clip to keep things fresh, to keep things exciting, and also know that I've built in a break because 2 hours on Zoom is a very long time. All right, so before we move ahead, I just wanted to build a definition together that we all agree upon, however temporarily. So just so that we're all standing in the same place when we talk about civics, because for me, I haven't taken a civics course since high school. When I'm starting to think about using art to teach civics, I needed to find a place to get started thinking about that content. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit the share screen, not the exit the share screen, but exit this like very polished way of presenting, because I want to edit this definition together so that it feels right. Top bullet is civics is the study of the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. Essentially, civics is about what citizens of a nation can do. Is there anything that you want added to this? Do you want to take something out? Do you want to switch a word? Can and should, thank you. Erica, can I get a thumbs up or a yes in the chat box if we're going to do can and should? Can and cannot. Ought. Oh my golly, hold on, wait a second. I have this wonderful conversation happening in the chat box where we have can and should, ought to do, can and cannot. Tell me more. What should I put? I think what we're trying to figure out what should be in this place right here that's highlighted currently. Oh, participate rather than do. This is going to get complicated and most beautiful. Let's keep going. Okay, I need somebody to unmute, like convince me first and foremost. It should be, what should be in the highlighted section? Kathleen is saying ought leaves open to too much interpretation. Lisa says can/cannot, should not. Okay. Which one are we comfortable with? Tell me.
I was just meaning that you could actually put both of them. Like you could have can/cannot and should/should not, just like you have can and should here.
Love it. Okay.
So I don't know if that's necessary. It might be silly. I like participate. I don't know how to include it grammatically in the sentence as constructed though. So could you say civics is about ways in which citizens of a nation can and cannot or should and should not participate in, I don't know.
Do we even need the nots? And do we even need the can? Maybe we can just simplify it by saying ways citizens of a nation should participate. And it's understood that there's a not, and there's not understood that there is a can.
I agree. The word can is misleading because it may refer to capacities and not necessarily to permission. Yes, you can do it. Okay, so
Right.
I think it's safer. It's safer to do away with that. Yes.
Yeah,
should.
do away with, yeah, and just keep should. Well, this is my vote, is to keep should and remove the not, meaning that it's implied that, of course, you know, there is a not, there's an opposite to should.
And should works both ways. So there is something that is right, there is something that is wrong.
Exactly.
I was wondering about the word citizens. Is a child considered a citizen? Is I mean, is a tourist? No, a tourist is not considered a citizen. But are we only talking about citizens or people who are living together?
Oh,
Share.
what a beautiful question. Let's talk it out.
But maybe citizens doesn't mean like, are you like a naturalized citizen, or were you born here, or do you have a green card? It means a person who lives in a nation. I mean, it has multiple meanings.
Okay.
Okay, so then we're going to put an asterisk here.
Could you say public life instead of citizenship? The study of the rights and responsibilities of public life, then anyone who is in a space might be participating in the
community life
or expectations. Yeah.
Do we feel good about this? Because Kathleen, I saw what you did there, a citizen in training for a child. I love that idea. And so if we can say citizens are people living in community, does this feel good? Are we solid on this, at least temporarily? This is all in pencil.
It feels more inclusive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. Okay, then, this is a much longer one, but let's get on it. We have civic literacy is the set of skills, knowledge, and competencies that individuals need in order to engage effectively in civic life. Civic literacy may include understanding the voting process and political institutions, the ability to advocate and organize, and the capacity to deliberate about public issues. Does that feel?
I'm so sorry, I have my hand raised.
Jump in, yeah.
I wanted to add something to the first one, not to belabor it.
No, please.
Upon the reading, I just thought that the word together should be added there.
Where would you like to put it?
At the end. Like, so it would read, civics is the study of rights and responsibilities of public life. Essentially, civics is about ways citizens of a nation should participate in communal. Oh, did you already put it in?
I just added it in on your suggestion.
Oh my goodness, all right. I don't know, does everyone agree with that? Like, so that it gives a sense of we are working together, we are citizens together?
I thought communal covered that, but you know, I'm a language person, so I'm looking at all these words. And so I thought communal meant together.
The nation should participate in communal life together. I see what you're saying because they have the same meaning. Okay.
What about
but we can give it, I'm also a language person. We can give it a little emphasis to, so it's not only living within the confines of a neighborhood, but it's interacting, negotiating. I mean, maybe the word together has another connotation.
Well, what about contribute to communal life together?
Or changing participating to participating. So it says, essentially, civics is about ways citizens of a nation participating. Oh no, that doesn't work, sorry.
I wonder too, maybe nation could be changed to community or something, or to somehow tie it into, because we have sort of local civics as well. And then if you have this idea of people living in a community, was what we were saying as citizens were. So citizens of a community should participate in.
If you want to put in community, then maybe remove communal, and then you can say life together, since you already have community in there.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Then it all sort of
ties in
together.
I love, okay, so Kathleen, you're asking some really interesting and challenging questions in here. Citizens, should citizens not have specific rights? So like we have shifted this, this definition in a way that is very inclusive, which is fantastic. And we're starting to think of it being kind of more meta about how humans live in community. But then that also gets into the question of citizens that was asked at the top. I think MT maybe even asked it about, are we talking about how this applies to tourists or not tourists? Are we talking about children, yes or no? So this is a really interesting query. And I think, you know, I don't know that we're going to be able to answer that question, but I just wanted to elevate it because I think it's really a powerful question. So let's get to civic literacy before we fall too far down the rabbit hole, because we can come back to this at any time. So are there anything, oh, hold on now, Kathleen.
And animals too.
How about beings?
Living creatures.
Beings. How about beings?
Beings, yeah.
Love it. Okay. So I love that because one of the things that is coming up in more in civics education right now is thinking about our relationship with the world that we live in and recognizing that humans have, you know, impacts on the natural world. So this is really interesting. So civic literacy is the set of skills, knowledge, and competencies that individuals need in order to engage effectively in civic life. Civic literacy may include understanding the voting process and political institutions, the ability to advocate and organize, and the capacity to deliberate about public issues. Tell me, is there something in there that you feel like is missing, something about when we are participating in civic life that needs to be called out?
Well, you know, this statement makes it seem that there are people that will be excluded in their ability to advocate if they have restricted rights.
Okay.
For example, you know, a green card holder, or illegal alien, or, you know, whatever, you know, other people who may not be able to advocate and for themselves, maybe.
Yeah.
I would also widen the concept to participation in demonstrations, in making your voice be heard, in writing, in participating in media. So it's
and in that way, those people that I mentioned have voices because they can do that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Maybe something simpler. Okay, so that's how we start from K1, K2.
Yep.
Something about the accessibility of this, the inclusivity of this, that's a bit off. Like, and I'm not 100% sure how to write it. It's just that was the first thing that jumped out at me as well. Statement. Who is the statement for? Yeah, that sort of thing. Thank you.
Gorgeous. So I don't have answers to all these questions, but I think they are valuable as we continue to move through.
I'm just teasing.
No, none. Got nothing for you. Elizabeth's making a note in the chat box. There's power in numbers of citizens speaking out about public issues. More people means something gets addressed. Beautiful. Thank you.
Also, this idea of there's a set of skills. How is that set of skills disseminated to the people who need them? I don't know if that needs to be part of the
Thank you.
definition. I don't know.
That's great. I appreciate that. I think somebody else was sharing at the same time. Please jump in.
Oh no, I just had a kind of a question about the whole civics part.
Yeah.
So people who are immigrants and like want to become citizens, don't they take an exam and have to learn all about, you know, the whole voting process and our government?
Yes.
Yes.
Doesn't that,
as a naturalized citizen, that's what I had to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I feel like, I don't know, it may, people may totally like agree or not understand, but I feel like their civic literacy is so much better than people who are born citizens here, because I feel like when we learn the government in our school, like, I don't know, it goes in one ear and out the other. Like people don't know like the three branches of our government, but like people who are immigrants, they have to learn all about these different parts of civics. And I feel like they're more knowledgeable in these set of skills than born citizens are. And then it makes me think that they too should be part of, you know, the nation, or they should have the same rights and responsibilities of what everyone else was talking about in the first definition. I don't know. It was just something that I was thinking about while people were talking.
Thank you for that, because yeah, I as I mentioned, I haven't taken any civics anything since high school, and a friend of mine was naturalized 2 years ago, and she was like, "Oh, did you know this?" And I was like, "Nope." And it's wild. Thank you. Let's jump in. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say that Sarah says that people who take that exam, we need to learn so much about civics, but I don't think we go, when you study for that exam, I think you have to study like 100 questions. It doesn't really go into it that deep. You know,
It's true. My question was,
I think that sometimes I look at what the students learn in their government classes, as you say, and I mean, it's very, they go into government in a lot of depth here in high school. And that exam that you're talking about is, you just have to study 100 or 150 questions, and then they ask you 10. And at least when I took it in 2014, you had to get 6 out of 10. So it's not really, it's not that hard to pass that exam. But another thing that I wanted to mention about the definition is that civics or civic literacy should also, here it really focuses on voting process, political institutions, organize, advocate, but it doesn't say anything about relating to each other. And that's also civics, I from my point of view.
Thank you. That's really valuable. I want to make just a quick connection to check it with you all. One of the things that we were reflecting on when we were looking at that early Sol LeWitt piece, with like bouncing back and forth from the small to the large, the small to the large, the small to the large, I wonder about the experience of learning those 150 questions, right? You see these little no, I've got this, but maybe don't have a sense of how it all works together, and that interaction might actually be a really important component. There's some really interesting notes in the chat about Native communities and other forms of governance. So recognizing that when we are talking about civics within a Native community, it may be that the people that we're speaking with might have a significantly different understanding of what it means to relate to one another and how that relates to governance. So thank you for calling that out. I really appreciate that. Barbara, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. There's some really interesting conversations about expatriate experience that are happening in the chat, and I don't want to knock anything off your plate, but rather to just, as I mentioned, to keep moving. So we are going to hang on to this slide as just a place to kind of revisit, revise, and to think aloud together. I'm going to go back to the slideshow just so that you know where we're going at the end of our time together. So in about an hour, is turning some of this over to you to figure out how you might connect any of the ideas you see here to artworks. And it won't be the case that I'm asking you to select a specific artwork, but rather to start looking at artwork as a metaphor, a way to dig into some of these ideas. So the driving questions that you see here, they're driving and guiding questions that were created by a collaborative, which is called Educating for American Democracy. I chose this civic resource because it's recently issued. It's intentionally bipartisan with an effort to address some of the concerns we've already raised, which related to the depth and thoroughness of civic education, and thinking about what can be gained by reinvigorating civic education in the US. So these questions are generally from the 3rd through 5th grade band, just for ease of access. The framework goes from kindergarten through 12th grade. And the other reason, just to note it, the other reason that I selected this as our framework is that my colleague, Terry Cacho, who is at the National Museum of American History, was one of the scholars who contributed to this framework. So you'll see that there are 7 different themes. Those are civic participation, our changing landscapes, we the people, a new government and constitution, institutional and social transformation, a people in the world, and contemporary debate and possibilities. And then each one of those themes has tons of questions that are meant to provoke conversation, but I selected just a few of them that you see on the right side. So this is a preview. You don't need to remember anything about this, but I just wanted you to know what it is when we get back to it. What we're going to do next is I'm going to send you all into small groups in just a minute. And the intention of doing this is that you can play with the rules. So the rules are at the bottom. You are going to go into your breakout rooms and you're going to look at the rule. Lines from the midpoints of lines. That's the rule. So the rule I'm putting into the chat box. Lines from the midpoints of lines. You're going to look at it and you're going to do just as we did before. We're going to look for the parts of the rules and think about the ways that those parts interact with each other. Again, we're working the same problem backwards. So rather than looking at the complete product and then figuring out the rules, we're going to look at the rules and then ultimately aim toward creating a product. Then once you've talked it through and you feel like you have your arms around what this rule set might include, I'm going to invite you to sketch what they tell you to do, so on a piece of paper, and then briefly chat to each other about what did you discover by trying the rules out. So that is the task. Again, you're going to look at the rules. What are the parts? In what ways do they interact? And I'll put this in the chat. Then you're going to draw. Then you're going to talk about discoveries. That's it. It's hard to type and talk at the same time. Sorry, guys.
Sorry, you're going to send new rules?
These are the rules. This is literally it. Lines from the midpoint of lines. That's your rules, your new ones.
Okay, because we can't read the complete slide.
Thank you for telling me that. Is something blocked?
No, you just need to go onto you need to open the chat and then you can see it on top of her slide. On top of Elizabeth's slide.
Okay. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So I'm going to send you into breakout rooms. It's going to be, let's say, 7 minutes to do all of this in. And then when you come back, if you'd be willing to share your work, I would really appreciate that. We're going to go into 4 breakout rooms. So you'll have 3 or 4 people in there with you. Before you go, is there any questions? Kathleen, draw anything? No, you're going to try out drawing the rules. Thank you for asking that question. So if I told you draw lines from the midpoint of lines, what would you draw? Any other questions before I send you into the breakout rooms?
So we have to draw together or separately?
I leave it to you. You are a self-governing body.
So we have to come up with the rules.
Thank you. Okay. I see where I have failed you. The new rules are at the bottom. So just like before, when we were looking at the squares and we said the rules that created those squares are lines and colors, straight, not straight, broken lines using all combinations of black, white, yellow, red, and blue for lines and intervals. That was the rule set that created that square situation. This time I'm giving you the rules first. And the rules are very simple: lines from the midpoints of lines.
Okay, I got
Cool.
it.
All right. Thank you. I'm so glad you asked questions, everybody. I really appreciate it. All right. Are you ready?
Midpoints of lines. Yes.
Steady.
Yes. Overthinking.
No, it's okay. So,
Let it flow.
all right, friends, welcome back. So my query to you first is, would you be willing to show your work? So I'm going to leave this setting here and I'm going to stop my share. And if you are willing to show your work, would you please hold it up to the camera? I would love to see you guys. What are you noticing? Because I'm noticing a lot. What do you see? You all got the same set of rules. Like, what's happening here?
Well, everyone's got a
I
point.
think,
Go ahead. Yeah, that's all.
Jump in, Kathleen.
Oh, I think in our group, it was interesting that we all had different kinds of lines. Maria had like what looked like a street map. And our other partner had, Erica, she had wavy lines. And then I started with a circle. And then I just noticed that every line you made, you could make a new line from the midpoint. But we all came up with different things.
So interesting.
Yeah, so our group discussed sort of what wasn't part of the rule, and as far as thickness of the line, waviness or straightness of the line, and so that I think there was lots of room for interpretation.
Cool. So you found the gaps. I love that.
we sort of got stuck on the definition of a line. So should a line be straight, or should it, and what is midpoint? What is a midpoint is it where on earth on that piece of paper that we have, depending on the area you're focusing on. So it was very rich in terms of debate. In my case, I didn't get inspired and I only made 2 crossing lines, but it got me started. Okay, but Ron was beautiful. Ron, would you like to show it again? Then we learned about each other's professions. Okay.
Oh my gosh, look at that.
Yes.
I feel like you must have a background in botany or something like that.
Yes.
Okay.
I know that if I had done this project with my coworkers, they would have stressed that the results came out the way they did because there was no set endpoint. And so we didn't have a model at all. We didn't model the ending at all. And so that's why all the answers were so divergent. And as instructors, that's just an important thing that they would have talked about.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. That's really important. Lisa's put in the chat box, how do you start a line if lines have to start from the midpoints of lines? Oh my gosh, we could fall down a rabbit hole here. I love this. Okay, so before we fall too far down that rabbit hole, I wonder, just from the perspective of you all being in a small group and getting the questionable directions I provided you, what decisions did you have to make as a group before you could even get started? What were you doing?
We had to, I think we started with like, what does midpoint mean? And I shared what I thought midpoint was, but I didn't want to influence the other members of the group. So I actually took the piece of paper and I measured like the midpoint of the paper, and then that's where my midpoint was. I don't know that my fellow participants did the same.
I love that. Anil's put in the chat box consensus. So you had to come to some sort of consensus.
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah.
Anything more that you did?
Maybe we didn't reach a consensus, a final answer, but all the conversation that took place was very interesting, and it opened your mind, okay, to many other venues. Okay, so for example, Cynthia was talking about, she contextualized the midpoint according to geometry, then according to computer work, and Rowan was more like into the arts. So, and we listened to one another respectfully, I think.
So even if you didn't say it, you established some norms about the ways that we interact with one another, or the ways we do or don't speak to one another. Okay, cool. How would all of this have been different? Oh, go ahead, jump. Yeah.
I think it was interesting how, like, the more we looked at the rule, the more new things kept popping up. Because at first it was just, oh, the keywords are line and midpoint. But then we were like, well, what about from? Because the lines are coming from the midpoint, like from's a big word. And then it was like, well, lines is plural, it's not singular. So now we can have more than one line. And then it was like, well, midpoints is plural too. So now we can have lines, you know, not being connected. They can go from anywhere. They don't even have to touch if they don't want to. There can be space in between them. So it just kept like going more and more to like possibilities.
So you thought about the parts, right? Like if we look at this rule as a system of words, right? You looked at the individual parts very carefully, it sounds like, and you thought about their number, their direction, that, you know, all of that. That's so beautiful. So Anil's added, we expressed our thoughts and ideas while interpreting the simple rule, realizing that besides the rule of a midpoint, there weren't more specific rules. I love this. So my query then would be, how would this whole thing have been different if Solowit's rule was more explicit?
Our end products might have been a little bit more boring.
But why boring?
More uniform, more the same, not boring, more the same.
Okay. Anything more?
Everybody brought their interpretation to it, and we left it more free. Whereas some of the groups, I'm thinking it's interesting that they were haggling over the weight of the line, the width of the line, the saturation color of the line.
Yeah.
What an interesting point, right? We're here to talk about civics, and we're talking about like haggling over these details, right? Like that the word choice, the saturation, the width, all of this stuff like gets you into these long, lengthy conversations about something that seems so minute. And it would be particularly more expedient if the directions were very explicit. You'd make what he told you to make. Cool.
No, I think what would have changed is if you had a goal. There was no like end goal, so it was open-ended.
Yeah.
And you could do what you wanted. I think that's why all my two partners came up with something completely different. Yeah. You weren't inhibited in what you could create. And we didn't know if we were drawing a bridge or something.
Yeah.
And you didn't tell us what materials to use.
Truth, I did not. Man, you guys are good at finding space. Good at you. That's awesome. Lisa's noting in the chat box that sometimes specific rules add comfort. Yeah, like for sure, when I'm in a new place, that's really helpful to know if I'm supposed to be standing on the right or not. And because I don't like to feel like an outsider. So yeah, more restrictive rules perhaps would have made us less creative. We got to have a little bit more self-expression and interpretation. Cool. All right, here's where I'm going to be really annoying. I want to show you one of Solowit's end products because I just think it's interesting to think about what happens. So let's see. Here we are. This was the original set of rules, right? And this is Solowit's, well, one of his interpretations, right? It's a print. It was made in 1975. And he did lines from the midpoints, of lines, and it looks like this. So I'm curious, when you see this, which was, from the artist's hand, what thoughts do you have about the correctness of your interpretations? Kathleen likes that language is included. I think that was kind of funny because it's a line from a book, right? So he's very, very clever. Anything more?
He also has lines that are not in the midpoint.
Tell me more. Where do you see them?
It looks to me like some of these lines say the bottom, toward the bottom right, like that bottom line has a line intersecting it that looks closer to a different point that's not the midpoint of a line.
Beautiful.
So he's broken the rules.
I guess he can as the artist.
Yeah.
I love that.
It's his rule.
So Lisa asked the question, when a line crosses a line, does it become two new separate lines? It almost seems like it's breaking a rule. So we're like, what a wonderful thing it is to be able to see a thing and the rules and be able to say, like, is this guy being consistent? Is he playing by his own rules? I really like that. We're noticing the weight. Now you know where we're going. Soon we'll take a break. We're noticing the weight of the lines. We're noticing that some of them don't actually seem exactly straight. This is really great. Sarah, jump in, please.
Well, so I can see how, I keep touching something. I can see how it may seem that some of the lines aren't going through the midpoints, but they're actually, the line is actually going, each line is actually going through a midpoint. The lines are just overlapping each other and running through each other. So it may seem that like the line isn't following the rule, but if you like look carefully, the lines like go to another line, and then if you see like, okay, is it in the middle, then it's actually like in the middle.
Yeah, it's coming from the midpoint and intersecting somewhere else that's not a midpoint. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So it would almost be helpful to know which one was drawn first in order to be able to check the consistency with the rule. But since it seems like he's kind of overlaid them, it creates a depth or a prismatic effect, to borrow Anil's word. But then, I love kaleidoscope. Yeah, so we have these beautiful words. There's some complexity here, right? So does anyone feel like this one is more right because it came from the artist?
Well, it took longer and it's more involved. It definitely has the multi-dimensional look to it. But it's not more right.
So it has more depth, dimension, that sort of thing, but not more rightness.
Right.
Okay. Anyone want to build on that or challenge that idea? Okay. So I'll just.
I wonder why he chose to give some areas a blank space and some others. So, which was the decisive factor, the determining factor in placing text in some areas and nothing at all in some other areas.
So that we have some wonders about this process too, like how did he come to this decision, or is that part of the rule? I like that. It's like an invitation to the viewer. Thank you, Erica. I really like that. Anhels is curious, what does the text say? It makes you think of the complexity and variance of language. This is really interesting. So I'll just offer this because in our next step after the break, we're going to look at the interaction between maker and a system a little bit more explicitly. And so I just want to seed that thinking. So Solowit employs a team of trained assistants to construct, print, or paint his pieces. And his written instructions usually become part of the finished work, like we saw in the top of the boxes one, and then you can see even the rule set on the bottom left of this screen. When one of his assistants was asked who the creator of a painting was, she replied, "Well, we all are, and yet none of us is." Lewitt's work derives from simple sequences of numbers, and his sculptures, wall paintings, and prints often display every possible combination of their basic components. Cynthia is adding he's a mathematician. So we have this guy who's kind of turning the rules over to a body of people who are then given opportunity to interpret them. And what I'd like to do before we go on break is everybody mute, because this is just for you. I'm going to just ask you to quickly jot down some ideas. What connections do you see between what we've done so far and civics based on your own lived experience? And then you can see the text below, one definition of civic infrastructure. If you had to draw a graphic that captures your current thinking about this, what would you draw? So 2 tasks, don't overthink, this is just kind of giving you a way to put some thoughts on paper. First question, what connections do you see between what we've done so far in civics? And if you had to draw a graphic of the definition that you see below, what would you draw?
I'm sorry, draw a graphic of what we see below. What do you mean below? I don't see.
Thank you. We have this text, civic infrastructure is the.
Oh, I see. So, okay, that's okay. I get it.
Thank you for asking that question. I think there's the dance party happening upstairs in this house. So if you hear music and stomping, no, it is joyful. And whenever you're done, feel free to take a break. We're going to come back together. Let's see what time it is now. It is 13 after now. If you could come back here in about 5 minutes, so 18 after. So whenever you're done with your journaling, just take a break and I'll be here.
Thank you.
So welcome back. I hope it was a decent break to stretch your legs and get blood flowing again. We're going to be exploring interdependencies, and this is intended to be moving toward a sense of motion. We've been looking at these rules and we've discussed them as, how do we execute them? But I wanted to start to really dig into the idea that a system, whether it is, as I've mentioned before, designed to do, well, every system is designed to do something, right? And the parts interact with each other in a way that creates an end product. So we've looked at the end product, and now I want to kind of move back through that idea into the part where it's not about the end product, but rather how the whole thing plays together. And so we're going to call that generally interdependencies, just for the purposes of this conversation. And when we get to it, there's an artwork by a glass artist that we'll be using as kind of a metaphorical placeholder. And I really appreciated this quote from him. He said, "What is more important, concept or execution? The most successful work is probably an overlap of the two." So if we were to think of civics as being, these practices, these ways of engaging in communal life that are driven and shaped by the government systems and policies that we have in place at many different levels, is it the concepts that were put forth or the way that we execute them, or both mixed together, which I just really appreciated his perspective. So if you'll grab your piece of paper, find a little spot on it someplace. I'm going to show you this spinning wheel. And some of you may already be familiar with spinning wheels. It's fantastic. This is not from SAAM's collection. This is from the American History Museum's collection. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to listen to a description of a spinning wheel. And just based on the description, try to label this spinning wheel. So in order to label it, that means you need to make a quick drawing. So if you'll please make a quick drawing of this spinning wheel. And as you do, think about what are the parts of it. If we have a spinning wheel in real life, we could actually do a take apart, and that might be really neat. I unfortunately don't have that to offer you today, so we're doing it on paper to some degree. So hopefully you've got a very rough sketch. And I'm going to read this description to you. And as you go, my hope is that you'll listen carefully for the names of parts and try to label your sketch with the names of the parts. And I'll read this through twice, so no panicking. While there is no single spinning wheel design, the iconic spinning wheel has 3 splayed legs, a foot treadle connected to a footman that attaches to the driving wheel, thus making the wheel go around. A horizontal stalk is the wooden plank or bed upon which most of the apparatus rests. The driving wheel is perhaps the most prominent feature of the spinning wheel and resembles a wheel with turned spindles in the center. Thread is pulled along the outside of that wheel. The bobbin is a grooved wooden spool that fits on the flyer, which gathers the yarn after it is spun. The bobbin fits into a U-shaped flyer, a bracket with hooks on it that guide the yarn into the bobbin and keep the yarn evenly distributed upon it. The distaff and distaff arm hold a batch of unspun fiber. These are only the primary parts of the spinning wheel, as the typical wheel has well over 100 parts that fit together to ensure quality spinning. So that was reading 1. Even reading it out loud, it seemed like a blur of information. So I'm going to read it again. While there is no single spinning wheel design, the iconic spinning wheel has 3 splayed legs, a foot treadle connected to a footman that attaches to the driving wheel, thus making the wheel go around. A horizontal stalk is the wooden plank or bed upon which most of the apparatus rests. The driving wheel is perhaps the most prominent feature of the spinning wheel and resembles a wheel with turned spindles at the center. Thread is pulled along the outside of that wheel. The bobbin is a grooved wooden spool that fits on the flyer, which gathers the yarn after it is spun. The bobbin fits into a U-shaped flyer, a bracket with hooks on it that guides the yarn onto the bobbin and keeps the yarn evenly distributed upon it. The distaff and distaff arm hold a batch of unspun fiber. These are only the primary parts of the spinning wheel, as the typical wheel has well over 100 small parts that fit together to ensure quality spinning. So that's an encyclopedia.com definition. And rather than like checking your graphic, I'm just going to ask you to think about the interdependencies that you discovered. So what's connected to what? In what ways do these parts work together?
They all work together.
Ah, what a good answer.
Don't ask me to give you accuracy in the ways, because it's so complex. But I don't know if I misunderstood the exercise, but what I did was this, what you asked us to do, to first of all, to imagine all the components.
Yes.
And then to listen to the definition and listen for the elements and the parts. Was it that? Because I did
You
that.
got it. Yep.
Okay, good. Because I only had 5 components and then it got so much larger.
Yep. Beautiful. Thank you. So Lisa's adding, they either move or stabilize the others. So some of the parts move something, some of the parts stabilize something. And Neil, can you tell me more about the idea of them being all integral to one another?
Absolutely. I don't remember all the technical names.
Sure, of course.
When I look at it and when I was drawing it, I just noticed that I was also looking for midpoints, and next in every piece of this apparatus is like no part, like for it to function. I mean, it could not without all of its bits and pieces. In a very generic explanation of it, but that's what I meant. That it's just everything was integral. Like every piece of it is very well thought out. Like if parts of the frame that support one another, like from the bottom to the top, where you can sit the wheel itself. The part where the wool, or what appears to be a wig, but I think it's probably is hanging, and even the bits, I don't even know what to call them, those cylinders on the side at the back, like everything is just so interconnected. It was sort of fascinating for me. I've not, I've seen spinning wheels in my life. I've just never thought this much about it. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So the idea that each one of these things does something, there's a reason that it's there. It could take a different, the person could have not done the turning work that they did on the spindles of the driving wheel. It could be that those are just without the kind of contours. It could just be straight. Same for the legs, the 3 legs on the bottom. They could just be, rough hewn wood. It doesn't have to look like that, but you need these parts in order to do the work. Tori's noticing how much the description included each one's function. So we have this treadle, right? This is thing at the bottom. We push it up and down. It drives this stick that goes up and down, and that turns the driving wheel. And all of these things seem to have one impacts the next. Kathleen, thank you, is noticing the decorative features, but the decorative features themselves may actually contribute to the balance. That's really perfect, right? So the way that we form things has downstream effects. I appreciate that. It's interesting that rather than straight functional lines, it's a thing of beauty. Lisa, a chain reaction, right? So if we started to think of these things as each one, if we change something about one thing, we're not changing just one thing, we're changing the thing also, the way that it interacts with the next thing, which has a downstream effect. So this interdependence that we were talking about as we adjusted our definition of civics, as we were really deliberating about communal life and together and participating versus contributing, who do we include, like all of these kind of interdependencies were already baked into our thinking, but this is kind of a physical manifestation of that. And so what I wanted to do is start to think about, from a civics perspective, if we're learning about concepts of civics, if we're learning about the way that government works, the role of the citizen in the government, et cetera, I want to follow this down the line using the spinning wheel as a metaphor and think more specifically about what do you think you would gain by seeing a spinning wheel in action? So I'm taking you to concrete and then we'll go to abstract. What would you gain by seeing a spinning wheel such as this one in action? Thank you, Anil. The interconnectedness of all of us as citizens. Okay.
Well, excuse me. I actually have seen spinning wheel in action. My
Tell me
mom
more.
was a weaver, and we used to have one in our home.
Cool, Tori.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't really appreciate it at the time so much, but I do feel that sort of seeing this old sort of handmade kind of object that is now making another object also handmade, you sort of really appreciate not just the skill that went into making the spinning wheel, but that goes into making the fibers that then go into making whatever is the wool is then used for, or the yarn then turns into. And so just sort of an appreciation of the parts of a whole thing ultimately, and how much work it takes.
Yeah, it's really effortful, and it takes practice, and it takes patience that I don't have. It's really, I mean, awesome. Yeah. Lisa's noting that you would better understand the product that's produced, very similar to what you were saying, Tori, but then also the why of each of the pieces, how the parts work together to produce an end product. So the beauty, thank you, Elizabeth, of taking something larger like wool and making it into yarn that is thin and useful for knitting. Okay, so it seems like if we could see the system in action and understand its parts, we would be better able to appreciate it. So actually, we have a spinning wheel in our collection, and it is actually made of glass. Oh, excuse me, surprised me. So this is a glass artist who he blows the glass and forms the glass in a hot shop. So individual pieces. Then he lets those individual pieces cool. He takes them to his separate shop, and using a diamond coated jeweler's wheel, he grinds them down carefully so that he can assemble the pieces into functional work made out of this fragile material. And I want to show you the spinning wheel in action. And as you watch it, just think about, number one, first and foremost, the spinner is the person who is spinning the yarn. So in what ways does the spinner interact with the system? And then how might this serve as a metaphor for what we've been talking about so far? So here we go. So this is the carded wool. So she's got the bobbin in the center there. And that U-shaped thing is the flyer. And she's working the treadle, right? So her foot is pushing up and down. Ah, Maria, the spinner is initiating action like an activist or organizer. She's keeping tension on the carded wool so that she's creating a consistency of the wool as it goes through the system. More. She's twisting it. So there's a manner by which you twist one strand, and then you can, if you want to make thicker wool, do a counter twist with another strand. It's a process that takes some time to create change, going from the wool to the yarn. Oversight and careful attention to how the parts work together, especially a work that is, or a spinning wheel here that is made of a non-traditional material, this fragile, breakable material. She's watching the tension and moderating it. She's assuming the product will satisfy her requirements as she uses the system appropriately. Beautiful. She's controlling with her foot how fast or slow she goes. Oh, Tori, what a cool idea you're offering us, that the sound of this would be quite different for a glass spinning wheel versus a wooden one. Thank you. You need the repetition to keep the process going. There's this rhythm, there's care, there's a sort of symbiotic relationship between the spinner and this mechanism. Cool. So there's something very mesmerizing about this, and we could watch it for ages, but what I'd like to do is just ask, is there anything more that you want to add to any connection you see between this work and our conversation so far about civics? And you can either unmute and share aloud or drop in the chat box. Either way, you're most welcome. I've already got an idea about an organizer. I appreciate that. But anything more? I just want to make sure we don't drop any fruit here.
It made me think about the Sleeping Beauty.
Tell me more.
when a part is put to the wrong use, how you can all end up in a sleeping state and muddle up the whole thing, the whole beauty of it. So I made a connection between this image and literature.
Beautiful. I love that. Lisa is noticing the complication of civics, and that all parts seem to work when they're working together. And to your point also about, turning one part to an ill use could have impact on the whole. That's really interesting. Thank you. Lots of moving parts, possibilities for brokenness. It's like a ballet. There are names and positions and movements, and the way you put it together is up for interpretation. That's beautiful. And perhaps if one part breaks, the whole system breaks down. You don't know how to use the wheels, you're not going to get any yarn. Thank you, Tori. It's a really basic connection, right? So the necessity of civic education is partly like, if you don't know how to use the system, if you don't know where you fit into it, if you don't know the pressure points or leverage points, it's really hard to engage with it in a way that is empowering. So let's keep going. I want to, oh, we're not going to watch this again. Hold on just a second. There we go. I want to just give you a static view of this. So this is, as I said, a spinning wheel. It functions. We saw it function. What I was going to do if we hadn't had such a rich conversation at the start was to invite you into thinking about the manner in which this is presented. So recognizing that an artist has taken this kind of antique-y looking spinning wheel with its wooden spindles, et cetera, and he's created something that's far more ethereal. The manner in which he presents the spinning wheel somehow becomes a little bit more elevated by putting it in this new material. And so, we could talk, if we wanted to, about the manner in which we present things, that the words that we use to describe something, color and flavor, our reverence for it, but it also potentially makes it seem, out of reach. We could talk about that. But in the interest of time, I wanted to just make sure we got a chance to hear from the artist, and then start to think about one particular thing, which is his choice of material and how it impacts the process that he uses to assemble. So hopefully you'll hear his voice in just a second.
I saw one of these. I was in between commissions, and this is the sort of thing that I make in my free time, the sort of exploration that I do. And I saw a friend's mother had one of these in their dining room, different format, more of the traditional format spinning wheel that you tend to find. And what first drew me to it was the look of the turned wood, and how a lot of those bell jars and stuff, sort of the rings stacked up, has that look of turned wood in a lot of the traditional spinning wheels. But moreover, I was interested in that, again, that sort of simple elegance of the mechanism, in that it's doing this sort of complex work, but it's a simple thing it's a rather simple object when you break it down into its component parts. So I started to pull that thing apart in my mind, and I got some books, and I did some research on spinning wheel, and I figured out the hardest parts that would be the hardest parts for me to make, and I started there. I liked the idea of using a craft material, the glass in this point, to sort of refer to another material, meaning the fiber arts. It sort of brought in a little bit of that iron, the ironic quality that the glass hammer had, you know, for example, the seismograph had, in, you know, the fragility of it. So, spinning wheel was actually made in this shop right here. This is my garage at the time. That was my cold shop. It was a one-car garage, too small for me to park my truck in with nothing in it, let alone all my stuff.
Okay, so really quickly, what is grabbing you about hearing the artists talk about this? I've jotted some words down. We've got simple elegance and mechanism, starting with the hardest part, fragility, it's made in a garage. Anything more that's like that just struck you as he was speaking? Right. Research, starting with the hardest parts. Love it. Anything more? He's a creator, totally. So one of the things I hadn't thought of before is something that you all are picking up on, the care and thought, the intention, and inspiration from original, this organization and plan. Like, he has to be so deliberate because he's a glass artist. Glass does not bend. It is an unforgiving material. If you were building a spinning wheel out of wood and it wasn't just right when you started to use it, if you had the skills, you could make some adjustments, right? You could sand it, you could chisel off a little bit, you know, all these different things. He has to get it right the first time, because if he doesn't, the whole thing doesn't go together correctly. And it won't work. When we started to think about those interdependencies, you know, he talks about 10/1000ths of an inch as 10/100ths of an inch, excuse me, as his measure of accuracy, because, you know, it's his margin of error is so small when he's putting this together to make something functional. So he has to do this prep work, which I think is a really interesting thing to consider. If the tolerance in his work is so slim, I don't think we could live together in community like that. Whereas with the Saul LeWitt work, we had so much leeway, space for creative expression. It's quite a different thing. And I'm just curious, I'd like to open the floor. What are you thinking about when you juxtapose those two things? Systems of government.
I was kind of struck by when he said the elegance of the simple mechanism, kind of that, because the mechanism is so simple, he was able to use this very challenging material because it was based on sort of a simple rule, if you will, or a simple starting point. Although I kind of agree that it could shatter at any minute, so it's very delicate. But maybe that provided some of the freedom that we saw in our lines rule.
Yeah.
And just the thought.
Thank you, Tori. I appreciate that. Materials that are too brittle and not robust or resilient may no longer work. Thank you, Kathleen. The necessity, Lisa's noting about the necessity of trial and error. What a beautiful thing that he was able to iterate on a time-tested tool, right? He chose a spinning wheel that, you know, there's a lot of trial and error that went into the creation of the 18th century spinning wheel that we saw. And so he is able to iterate on that. It's simple if everything works. I really appreciate that. And starting to think about different systems of government, right? And the manner in which we are governed or participate in our governance. So I wanted to make sure to give you a little time to start to apply this to reality. So in my magical world, when I don't overpack things, we were going to do an embodied reflection whose intention, sorry, was going to be getting you up out of your seat, using your body to demonstrate new ideas that you might have about civic infrastructure. But just in lieu of doing that, just to reintroduce the idea of civic infrastructure being the sort of the organizations, the institutions, the loose gatherings of people that we come across every day that kind of change and influence the world that we live in, and can both be gatekeepers or empowerers, particularly of participating in civic life. So again, that's what we were going to do. We're not going to do that because I want to make sure you get a chance to do a little. Thank you, Lisa. You're very accommodating. If you want to do a dance party, feel free to get up and move your body. You are welcome to. Just wanting to end by noon, I'm going to ask you to do a 10-minute version of what's probably a 25-minute task. So scale down and don't bludgeon yourself. But going back to applying this to content, all I want you to do is go into a small group. You're going to have this entire Google slide deck in just a second. You're going to go into your small group. You're going to just choose one of the questions that you see on screen that you feel drawn to. Like as a group, you're going to come to consensus on a question. And then you're just going to replay some of the workshop approaches and content, and start to think about, is there anything that you would like to harvest from this workshop, or anything that you've seen, bring a group brainstorm to this, that you think would help address the question that you've selected. And then finally, if you get to it, and if you don't worry, in what ways might you use an artwork as a metaphor to support or engage with that question? And what kind of features would you look for in an artwork so that it would be an appropriate one? So again, you're not choosing the artwork itself, just start to think about, is there a criteria set? Like the spinning wheel is useful for talking about interdependencies. It's useful for talking about structure. It would probably not be terribly useful for talking about rules because it's so complex. So here is the direction set. At the top right, you can see a tiny URL, which I will drop into the chat box also. This is going to bring you to the, sorry, like I said before, I can't type and talk, /SAAM big art. It's going to bring you to this slide deck, and you will see that there are slides for each group. So you can just decide which group you want to be. You're going to select a question from slide 26. You're going to drop it into our selected question is. In order to make the approach better fit our question, we would, and then you're going to, on the top bottom right, list the 3 to 5 criteria that you would think that you would look for in an artwork to make it, to engage an artwork with this question. So that is all we're doing. This is going to become a running document for the group and hopefully a point of reference for you later. I am going to assign you to breakout rooms, and we're going to just do a quick 10-minute breakout room. You're going to be with the same people you were with before, so you already have your norms established, and I will see you all again in 10 minutes, unless there are questions or concerns at this point.
Sorry, Elizabeth, would it be possible for you to allow us to share screen? You want to?
Yes, that's a great idea. Let me do that.
Thank you.
Oop. All right, thank you for raising that. Any other questions or requests? All right, off you go.
Cut off in mid-sentence. Okay.
You talked so much. We got, yeah. Oh my goodness, Elizabeth.
That was very mean. That was very mean.
It was terrible. I was terrible. I apologize.
That was 10 minutes. Wow.
We were having such a good conversation at the start, and I apologies to everybody. I have such a hard time stopping conversation. So it's 100% my error that I left this huge task till the very end. But I wonder, instead of debriefing about all of this, because now you each have this tool in your toolbox, or like in each other's, you have each other's thinking also. I'm just curious, like, what is one takeaway that you have from either that conversation or this whole thing that you think would be valuable to hold on to? Just one takeaway.
I will say one thing, please, really
Yeah.
brief. I will say that it's really powerful to be on or a part of something like this today, to work with two ladies who I've just, met basically, and to have that interconnectedness, like being far apart, and to be able to discuss these topics and to see that other people are also working towards them. That is, like, I will leave this today with that comfort in my heart, if that makes sense.
Oh, I'm so
Thank
glad.
you. Vote for me for the next something so you can just did like an elaborate speech at a pageant, but
No, I loved it.
Yeah,
It's great.
lovely. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. And Lisa's noting that lots of different ways of teaching a topic or subject catches different brains and interests. Thinking of stories, performances, and poems as a living symbol to unlock and discuss together. What a wonderful idea. Any other ideas are most welcome.
So while we were working together and talking, I continued with my lines and just started putting more stuff on my page.
Oh, cool.
And so by the time we were done, my page was, I was actually paying attention, but also, doing things to kind of keep my thoughts going on.
Yeah.
The lines from midpoint.
Cool.
So it was fun to put all of that into action.
I love that, putting things into action for sure. Kathleen is noting about how it would allow students to be, our approach would allow students to be metacognitive. It's a really powerful word. Looking at art can open doors to so many subjects and get people talking in a creative way. Beautiful. Thank you, everybody. I know we are over by an hour, or an hour, dear God, no, 1 minute. But I just wanted to say thank you. It has